Tragically, the United States has a long and traumatic history of politically motivated violence, and there was another highly troubling episode on the weekend when the elderly husband of one of America's leading Democrats was savaged.
New details we're learning about the hammer attack against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. 82-year-old Paul Pelosi recovering from a fractured skull and other injuries after the assault in their San Francisco home.
Police arrested the alleged assailant, David DePape, a 42-year-old conspiracy theorist, and it's expected he'll be charged with attempted murder. Police claim he broke into the house looking for Nancy Pelosi. His motivation remains unclear, but plenty in the media are jumping to conclusions and allocating blame.
Others in the MAGA Republican Party who glorify violence.
I think this terrified anyone who's in Congress. It must terrify anyone who's a public figure who's been a hate object made by the right. We're at a point now where our politics has become, at least for Republicans, civil war. This is not sustainable. Your thoughts?
This is what happens, Joy, when you demonize the other. When you take their humanity away, you make violence not only possible, but likely.
Well, thank goodness, hey, that the left and the Democrats don't demonise their opponents or otherwise make them hate figures. You know, like Democrat Congresswoman Maxine Waters, what she said in 2018 when she called for supporters to target members of Donald Trump's administration.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And remember what happened earlier this year as word got out about the impending Supreme Court decision overturning the Roe versus Wade abortion case.
Activists now planning to protest outside of Justice Samuel Alito's house after a weekend of outrage over the leaked Supreme Court opinion on Roe.
I mean, what I saw outside of these justices' homes was nothing short of horrifying. It really tells you a lot that we've gotten to the point in this country where protesters feel they can go to somebody's private residence, scream and yell and try to intimidate them into voting the way that they want them to do.
That's right, they targeted judges' homes. In July this year, protesters descended on a DC restaurant after word got out that Conservative Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh was dining there. He was forced to leave through the back door. Ugly stuff. But Democrats revelled in it. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "Poor guy, he left before his souffle because he decided half the country should risk death if they have an ectopic pregnancy within the wrong state lines. It's all very unfair to him. The least they could do is let him eat cake." And as far as the Biden administration was concerned, it was no big deal.
Because protesters do not agree with an opinion that they signed on to, have no right to privacy, is what you're saying.
But Peter, this is people have the right to, this is what a democracy is. People have the right
to privacy?
And bear in mind, that took place only a month after an incident where Kavanaugh's life was threatened.
This morning, a cab pulled up to the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's neighborhood. A man got out with a backpack and a suitcase. According to court documents, he said he was there to kill Justice Kavanaugh, and he was carrying the tools to do it. Officers say they found a Glock 17 pistol, a knife, a crowbar, zip ties, duct tape, and more in his bags.
Spare us this hypocrisy about violence and intimidation being confined to one side of politics. Have the media forgotten how Democrats and their supporters rioted after Donald Trump was elected in 2016 and they talked about leading a resistance?
Yes, I am outraged. Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
There were riots back then, of course, and then in the election year 2 years ago, many US cities suffered riots, violence and deaths in Black Lives Matter protests, and they were fuelled, of course, by radical Democrats who even made calls to defund the police. So as far as I'm concerned, in the past, in the present and in the future, I think all political violence is an abomination. I think it should always be condemned and never be fuelled or encouraged. And no politicians, and certainly no one in the media, ought to be making excuses for people who visit violence upon others, no matter what side of politics they belong to. We need law enforcement agencies to deal firmly with these thugs, including the latest alleged perpetrator. And on reflection, surely even Nancy Pelosi herself might think about toning down her language. Here's what she said about Donald Trump on the day of those disgusting Capitol Hill riots, and this was before the real trouble unfolded.
When he comes, I'm going to punch him out. This is my moment.
I would pay to see that.
I've been waiting for this, for trespassing on the Capitol grounds. I'm going to punch him out, and I'm going to go to jail, and I'm going to be happy.
Yeah, I think they'd all do well to take the heat out of politics and quit with the language of violence and the excuses and the incitement. I mean, we've seen Democrat and Republican politicians shot in the US in recent years, for crying out loud. One side or the other trying to blame their partisan enemies is pretty sick. And any media that buys into that sort of politicking is forgetting its responsibilities.